Rabbit's trick had
Imagination in cultural
Rabbit
memory.
tried to call that clay man back.
I've had many teachers in my life showing me the way that, yes, it is possible to embrace what you are, who you are. Every person is part of a generation, and every generation is carrying a story forward. Poetry is an art of sound, but every art, you have to depend on listening beyond what's most obvious.
Where does poetry come from, imagination or memory?
That's an interesting question to be asked right off. That's a huge question. I think that's a question we're always asking. It's like, where do humans come from? Why are we here? And what does it mean? And poetry is really part of the questioning. It's funny how poetry is. I don't always know what I'm doing. I think any artist will tell you that, because you're an artist because you're exploring something unknown with known tools. And but it's interesting how this poem, this rabbit figure, has come to light in recent times. Rabbit is up to tricks. In a world long before this one, there was enough for everyone until somebody got out of line. We heard it was Rabbit fooling around with clay in the wind. Everybody was tired of his tricks and no one would play with him, and he was lonely in this world. So Rabbit thought to make a person. And when he blew into the mouth of that crude figure to see what would happen, the clay man stood up. Rabbit showed the clay man how to steal a chicken. The clay man obeyed. Then he showed him how to steal corn. The clay man obeyed. Then he showed him how to steal someone else's wife, and that clay man obeyed. Rabbit felt important and powerful, and clay man felt important and powerful. And once that clay man started, he could not stop. Once he took that chicken, he wanted all the chickens. Once he took that corn, he wanted all the corn. And once he took that wife, well, he wanted all the wives. He was insatiable. Then he had a taste of gold. He wanted all the gold. Then it was land or anything else he saw. His wanting only made him want more. Soon it was countries, then it was trade. The wanting infected the earth. We lost track of the purpose and meaning of life. We began to forget our songs, our stories. We could no longer see or hear our ancestors, or talk with each other across the kitchen table. Forests were being mowed down all over the world to make more. And Rabbit had no place left to play. Rabbit's trick had backfired. Rabbit tried to call that clay man back, but when that clay man wouldn't listen, Rabbit realized he'd made a clay man with no ears.
You wrote on a blog that this identity, and this is a quote from you, this identity question is one of the most controversial in our communities and will continue to be so until we heal of self-hatred and loss from colonization. How do you respond to questions of identity and then move beyond stereotypes?
What we run into because of the history of this country, which has been so distorted by the Wild West, Wild West shows, by mascots, by, all of that, we're not really seen as human beings. And so what happens, a lot of the public gets caught up in the sentimentality and nostalgia of those kinds of images, because often those are the only images that America will allow us to be seen in. So they get caught up in that and want to be identified as that. And so there's a large number of the population who want to be part of that notion.
And people who might not have grown up on a traditional, maybe pueblo or reservation, and they want to come back and find their roots or find recapture, or
who you are is with you. We have urban populations of natives who, we know who we are. We have populations that are in reservation or tribal areas. Not all tribal areas are called reservations. Tulsa, essentially, which is where I'm from and where I now live, is really Muskogee Creek. Most of it is Muskogee Creek lands.
How can poetry help the healing that needs to take place in these situations?
That's the healing is what is compelling me about, the U.S. Poet Laureate position. I mean, how do we heal? What does healing mean? Healing is not often easy. It's really rugged. There's often challenges. There can be destruction in healing, just as there is immense possibility for creativity. And so poetry, a poem can hold history, a poem can hold, it can hold the heart, it can hold, it's the place that you go to when you don't have words. And often healing requires that you go into that place that you have always avoided because you don't have the words.
In your new collection, American Sunrise, the poem for which it's named that you wrote, it's an homage or an evocation of the famous poem by Gwendolyn Brooks, yes. We Be Cool, which that poem is a portrait of young black men who are simultaneously bragging, but they're also questioning the validity of their existence. They're struggling to find their place in American society. What parallels did you find in Native American youth?
So it is about young people, young Native people years ago trying to assert themselves as human beings and assert their identity and place with that kind of spirit, that spiritedness that you have at that generation when you're opening your mind to imagination in the memory, to what is possible from the doorway and finding doorways that only they can open. And so the poem really is about that kind of energetic and saying, at the end, yeah, we are still America. We are, we're here.
It also brings out a theme I see in your poetry about the difficulty of trying to live in at least two worlds, if not more.
More.
Yeah. How do you try to talk about that in your poetry for yourself and for other Native people?
I just listen and I do my poetry. I don't sit and think, well, I live in how many worlds, or I don't. It's not that. It just, it emerges that way. People ask me, well, do you write as a Muskogee Creek person? Well, I write as who I am as a human being, and it's about listening. And so you ask where poetry comes from. Well, you listen. And it comes from, the source of life, which gives us a breath. It comes, you listen, and you have all your tools there. But the first part of it is listening and then enjoying the ride. But it takes you, of course, it's going to come through what you are, and who are you, and where do you come from, and who are your ancestors, and what plants have fed you, and how. Are they speaking through you or with you? It's a combination of all of that. An American Sunrise. We were running out of breath as we ran to meet ourselves. We were surfacing the edge of our ancestors' fights and ready to strike. It was difficult to lose days in the Indian bar if you were straight, or easy if you played pool and drank to remember to forget. We made plans to be professional, and some of us could sing. When we drove to the edge of the mountains with a drum, we made sense of our beautiful crazed lives under the starry stars. Sin was invented by the Christians, as was the devil, we sang. We were the heathens, but needed to be saved from them. Thin chance, we knew we were all related in this story. A little gin will clarify the dark and make us all feel like dancing. We had something to do with the origins of blues and jazz. I argued with the music as I filled the jukebox with Times in June, 40 years later, and we still want justice. We are still America. We.